Hello and welcome to the Bellingham Real Estate Podcast. I'm Paul Balzotti. I'm here with Dexter Andrews. Welcome, Dexter.
Thank you, Paul.
And today we're going to talk about mid-year market update and then also touch on a little bit of the 2023 market versus the 2008 market because we've been through both, right?
We've had the benefit of being through both.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And so just to get right into it, Dexter, why don't you share a little bit more about your background in real estate?
For sure. So I was thinking about that on the way here today, Paul, because as time goes by, which many years have gone by. In fact, I was just thinking about it, and I've been in the real estate market. I took a little hiatus, but roughly for 30 years, which is a long time. And I've seen a lot in those 30 years in the real estate market. And even, when I was dabbling in some other things for a few years, real estate's something that once you have a pulse of it and you enjoy it, as I do, you're always dabbling in it one way or another, or at least keeping an eye on it. So it's been a fun journey and a journey that's always continuing and interesting to look back as we're doing today to reflect on some of our experiences to see how's that affecting us today, or what can we learn from the past that we can carry forward today. Yeah.
So tell everyone where you were in business before.
Yeah. So I was in Minnesota. Actually, I grew born and raised in Minnesota in west of the Twin Cities. Did real estate there for about 20 years, just under 20 years. And basically right out of college.
Just like me.
Yeah. Right out of college. It was one of those things that always interested me. My mom was actually into renovating homes, selling homes. But she never had a real estate license. Well, she did it. She just had a real estate partner. So when I started expressing interest, she's like, well, let's do it together.
Yeah.
So interesting enough, my mom and I got a real estate license
at
the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very sweet.
Right?
Mother-son team.
I know. And it actually worked well because I'd just blown out my knee playing soccer at the University of Minnesota. So I was on crutches, so it kind of helped having mom carry my stuff.
Is she still in real estate there?
No, she's not. She moved out here. When she moved out here, she got out of real estate, and but she'd been in it for roughly 20 years in Minnesota as well.
So she's here now.
She's here. She lives at Whidbey Island, but she's
okay. I was going to say
she's retired
because we could have the mother-son team back together.
She's retired now. She just watches everything I do.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. So we're gonna let's touch on kind of a mid-year market update for 2023 here. So we have just over a 2-month supply of inventory. So there's home sales and home values, right? So home sales are down 25% year over year. That's from record sales numbers, of course, but still substantially down. And then interest rates are now up just around 7%.
A little over 7.
Just a little over as of today.
Yep.
I mean, people watch this later.
Yep.
And basically, home prices are basically down 5 to 6% year over year, but they were down as much as 8 to 10% going into January, February, and then we had a little spring surge where values popped up 3 or 4%.
Typical.
And then as rates have gone up the last couple months, now home prices have kind of flattened. And then depending on, in the county, they're maybe down a smidge this month, but generally speaking, they're pretty level. So again, just over 2 months supply, 7% interest rate, sales down, home values slightly up for the year, but down still 5-6% year over year. What sticks out to you when you're kind of looking at the indicators out there right now?
The biggest thing for me, I think, is the interest rate has been interesting. It shot up, and I think a lot of people went, "Oh my gosh," hit the brakes. And then there was a little bit of playing with the interest rate. I noticed it kind of came down a little bit. There's a lot of hopefulness, I think, in the market. People were like, "Oh, it's tough when you've been fairly, I think, almost use the word spoiled with interest rates." And the buyers out there had kind of, besides the frenzy in the buying market, had really had a nice interest rate to work with. So when that happened, I think there was a lot of hope. I think some people that were sitting on the fence made some choices to move forward and buy something. And now I think there's still a lot of kind of trying to figure things out. And it's tricky if you're currently in a home with a really low mortgage rate. It's tricky to make a decision to buy a house that's, if you're stepping up in home value and also stepping up in mortgage value, your rate is, your monthly expenses are really, really drastically increasing.
Absolutely. And it's, everyone's saying, buy the house, don't buy the rate because rates will come down and all that. But ultimately, and that's one thing when we were getting rates in the 5s and 6%. But now it's like if you're locked into a 2.5%, 3% interest rate, and they're at 7, even if you're looking at it as a short-term thing, and then you plan to refinance, which of course everybody should, it's still a huge jump to your point. And so
Absolutely.
It makes it tough. It makes it super tough. And so people are seemingly only moving right now when they need to move or they really want to move. And, and of course there's always that happening. So what do you expect to see over the next, because I know you got a crystal ball, but like when you're talking to folks, like what are you kind of predicting or saying to people about what's going to happen the rest of the summer, the rest of the year? What's your just honest thoughts on it?
Yeah, so it's basically I just try to take information in like a sponge right now, and there's a lot of people that have different opinions. But as of recently, I think we're going to see interest rates kind of stay where they are for some time period here. At least that's what everyone seems to be feeling, and I agree with that. So with interest rates kind of sticking around and just a typical market, we'll see things kind of settle down here, meaning they're going to kind of ease off a little bit. We'll see slower market as we fall the end of the summer through the fall. And then I'm really curious to see what happens next spring. If we see any dip in the interest rates next spring, I'm kind of hoping there will be, because I feel that at that point, if we get a dip, we could see some activity in the marketplace. People are looking for something positive, and a percent or 0.5% change downward. I think people are like, hopefully on the idea that could make a difference, and that might make the difference to make something happen, and that could feed some more activity next year. But for this year, I think things are going to kind of stay par for the course.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as long as the rates are in this range, if they stay up, then sales will be slow. Home values will be flat, maybe a little soft in certain markets and price ranges. But all of the forecasts that we've been looking at all show over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years the same things, that there's still going to be slow, steady appreciation and growth. But you're right. I don't think you're going to see that till you see rates coming down. And so, so it's basically like a direct correlation almost between the rates and when home values will and home sales, both home values and home sales will make a rebound again.
Absolutely.
But one big indicator that I look at, and we'll touch on this more, I want to kind of get into this right now, is new construction. I mean, there's still very little new construction, so we still have a low supply, still strong demand, so we're still sitting on a good foundation, and that is what I want to kind of get to next. So you and I both were selling houses in 2006, 2007, and then 2008, 2009. So
correct.
Let's call 2021 or 2020, the pandemic years,
yes,
essentially like a boom for real estate, which is crazy to think about now in retrospect, but it was. Once you get past that first 2 months where it totally dropped, and but then super frenzy kind of market with really low rates, at least in Bellingham and Whatcom County.
Correct.
And then now we're kind of rates go up and then things slow down, and so but this is very different than what we experienced in 2008, 2009.
Very different.
What are some of the key? I mean, I will say the one similarity is sales being down year over year, but obviously home prices have not fallen nearly as much. What are some of the key things? Like if somebody asks you what was the difference between then and now, what are the things that you would explain that are different?
For sure. It really drastically different. Interesting to see two totally different ends of the spectrum, but yet markets that have come down. Back then, there was a time frame where it was really easy to get money. It was really easy. They were just postage stamping values on properties and then giving out money with very little down. And oftentimes people were going in and getting mortgages that were adjustable rate mortgages. So they were, the rates were so low, but they had basically fixed for 3 years, maybe 5 years. And we ran into scenarios where people's rates would start getting to that adjustment period, and they were going to go up. Even though rates were still very good back then, they had budgeted for, something that was really low, hadn't really thought about it. and got to a point where rates were going to adjust. They weren't really going to be able to afford it. The market had fallen off. They actually owed more for their home than their homes were worth selling. So they were caught in between a rock and a hard place. They were caught where they had to sell. The market wasn't dictating a sale. So they, so all of a sudden, we started seeing foreclosures. We started seeing short sales. We started, the market was getting flooded with properties that were distressed. And rates were slowly falling, totally opposite of what they're doing now. But yet, with rates even falling, the market was just getting washed out from underneath itself.
Well, and you were telling me earlier that, so in the Pacific Northwest, home values in 2008, 2009, 2010, they were dropping 5 to 8% maybe a year. It was very slow.
Mm-hmm.
And they reached a bottom in 2012. So it was kind of 3 or 4 years of slower sales and just slow declines in home values. You're saying in the Midwest, it was more drastic than that?
Well, in the Midwest, it was tough. It was really tough. In fact, we would see numbers, in the outskirts, so the almost secondary suburbs, we would see drops of 75 to even 80% in value.
Crazy.
In a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
So what happened is almost like a fire sale effect. So people saw this happening, and even if they weren't necessarily in the market to sell, they got scared, and homes started going on the market. It was almost like a chasing frenzy of, oh my gosh, I have to sell. My values are going down like crazy. And that just, it was a tumbleweed
effect.
It's
a stock market by houses.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was like people like sell. And as a real estate agent back then, it was tough because we had people coming that wanted to sell, and what they owed and their values, and it was a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. And so two things you bring up there that very poignant. One is the availability of money. I remember having a Washington Mutual lender talk to me at the Starbucks right across the street and give me a flyer for, a no-doc loan.
Yeah, I was going to bring those up too.
It's like a no-doc loan.
Right.
That means literally you do not have to prove anything. You can literally just, if you had a good credit score and you put on the application how much money you made,
yep.
You didn't have to prove any of it. So it wasn't even remotely the same because there was so many bad loans going on.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then you also bring up another good point, which is just the way that things occurred. I feel like ever since that happened, every buyer that I've ever worked with, and I'm sure you feel the same way or have had the same experience, and every year in the news, there's always this kind of lingering thing of when is the market going to slow down? When is the market, for the last 8 years? So everybody's always been a little kind of, there's almost this kind of hangover that occurred over the last 10 years in the market of always worried about that happening again.
Totally.
And so, of course, in the spring markets and in the last couple of years, there was bidding wars. There's people paying too much for a house, all that kind of thing, just due to the lack of inventory. But
Correct.
Truly just because they needed to buy a house.
Correct.
But not because they thought that home prices were going to go up forever.
Right.
Whereas before, when we were in that market, the mindset was very different.
Absolutely.
Whereas I had an investor I was working with who was literally saying to me, and he was going on it wasn't podcast at the time. I guess he was going on the radio and he was doing seminars, and he's just like, home prices are going to go up 7 to 8%, for the next 20 years. He was just saying things like that.
Right.
And there was this sense that things could never go down, that the market was just
bulletproof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody has thought that over the last few years. And so I feel like even in the bidding wars and things like that, everybody's approach has been different. Everybody's been buying things for more long term. They haven't been buying, and if they're buying something to flip, they've been a little bit more conservative.
Absolutely.
And then of course the money people have been putting more down. The loans have been super solid.
Yes.
So it's just been a way different foundation, a way different situation that we're coming out of.
So much so. It's interesting. I mean, there really was a huge learning curve. And it's actually pretty impressive to see people. They haven't had amnesia from that effect. They've actually, people have become, and part of that's because of the mortgage industry and lending industry, but they remember.
Yeah.
That was not a fun time. And
they
remember, if it didn't affect them, it affected somebody they knew.
Yeah.
Right. And so the decision-making process has definitely changed today from then.
Did you have any that just personally, did you have any, I had a period where coming out of that, when somebody would ask me like, hey, I want to pay this for the house, that I would kind of become even more constrained, where I would say, okay, well, you didn't want to predict anything that could sound like you're trying to sell somebody on anything, to the point where it could be a detriment for the buyer, because ultimately, if they're trying to get into something, and this is really now a market where it is slow and steadily appreciating, maybe not this next 3 months or the last 9 months, but generally speaking, and it was kind of, for most realtors that went through that, it kind of changed how they talked about things and
For
everything
sure.
like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a huge learning curve for us.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing when you're like, oh yeah, no problem. In a couple of years, we can sell you, make a ton of money.
Yeah,
It's all good. We're just rocking and rolling. This is great. Right. It's definitely, that was something.
Did you do short sales?
Yep. I did some short sales. Worked, actually at the time, I was listing and selling short sale properties and working with banks, but I actually ended up also working with a lot of buyers that were just specifically having me search out short sale properties.
Right.
Which, as you, I'm sure, know, the process was fairly slow. And,
yeah.
It could be a 6-month process from negotiating a deal to closing, but, people got, at the time, great deals on properties.
Yeah, and that's just a short sale is just simply when you're buying a house for less than what it's worth, and then you have to negotiate with the bank for the bank to take a lower payoff. And those are coming back a little bit, but again, they're not going to nearly come back to the extent that
exactly.
Yeah.
You just don't see the people that are upside down in their homes like there were back then.
Right. 6%, being down 6%, being down 5%, is not the same as 10%, 10%, or in your market, 70%.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page. It's going to be a slow but steady and solid rest of the year. And we still have also just a severe lack of new construction, whereas at that time, I don't know about in Minnesota, but in Whatcom County, I had looked back and there was 600 to 700 new construction homes, single family homes being built.
Yeah.
And right now we have 60, 70, 80 new construction homes being built, yet the population is 10,000, 15,000 more people than it was before.
Yeah.
And we have 10% as much new construction. So also just general with lack of supply, we're going to be poised for kind of a strong kind of rebound from this slight,
So we dealt with the same thing. That's a good point, because the developments, there'd be a bunch of developments that actually just turned into like the old rundown, like gold mines. There'd just be nothing there. There'd be vacant lots. The developers would fold up and, go away, and houses partially completed, just sitting there, and that's obviously, so there's neighbors. So let's say a development's 30% complete and you bought a house in there, and then all of a sudden the rest of the lots are basically sitting vacant and the houses that weren't completed are just sitting there. Those people are just, all of a sudden that's what helped drive their values in a negative way.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason we didn't see huge huge declines really fast.
Sure.
Is we've always had a really strong rental market.
Yeah.
And especially with the university.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
And then you tack on being close to Canada and close to Seattle and all those kind of things, but primarily probably the university is a driver for the rental market and the lack of new construction. Basically, even now, there's people who've invested in new homes that were being built in Blaine. There's a lot of new construction in Blaine right now,
yes,
as you know, and some of those new homes, they're just turning into rentals, and they're kind of cash flowing their rentals. So it's not like they're not
upside down.
No, they're fine.
It's working out for them.
And so it's kind of like we're in a market where, and even then, people could ride it out because the rental market was so strong.
Yeah, exactly. Bellingham's so unique in that way that we're, sandwiched between two, amazing metropolises, cities in Vancouver and Seattle, and we think our values are, been going crazy and high and whatnot. And I mean, it's nothing compared,
right.
Nothing compared to Vancouver, nothing compared to Seattle. So I think that helps soften our blow. I think we're protected. And like you said, the university.
Yeah. And I think also just I think on the West Coast, all the mid-sized cities that have great lifestyles are going to perform really well continuously because of the amount of consumers that are now able to basically work work from home. I just had one of my best friends move up here from Seattle just a few weeks ago, and they both work from home, and their kids are getting of age, and they decided they'd rather raise them here than in Seattle. And so here they are, but their income is solely from Seattle. So that's definitely that's not gonna go away.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that. I have my neighbor, some businesses, the Amazon one, for example, that actually they base their salaries depending on where you live. So
they'll make less than.
So potentially, but I don't know if you went in at one point, if you went in living there, I don't know how that works, but it's interesting that I didn't know that, and I had a conversation this last weekend with my neighbor about that.
Maybe they're doing well with their company they started with their companies when they were in Seattle, then they moved.
They kept the zip code, I don't know.
Well, but even if it drops, it's like if you're at Amazon and you live in downtown Seattle and you were going to make 150 and then it drops to 130 or 120, that's still a good wage for Bellingham, when you look at, so. And I mean, you're one of those. You're one of the people that transplanted here for the lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Because you're on the marina. You're out boating. So what? I mean, you couldn't have picked that up in Minnesota. You were on the lake. What were you doing?
Well, yeah, I did grow up on lakes. I grew up boating.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a big boater. He taught me. Basically once I could pull started my little Everroot motor, I could go out and take the little boat out.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an interesting comparison because people ask me all this all the time. And I think between Bellingham specifically and where I lived in Minnesota and the cabin areas of Minnesota, Bellingham is like that on steroids.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, the trees are bigger.
Right.
The water's bigger. There's a mountain as opposed to a hill. We used to learn how to ski on hills. It's the transition of going from a lake where you deal with the wind, but you can always see land, to going out in the ocean and dealing with tides and everything. That's quite a learning curve, but it's been super fun. I've definitely am bored with water in my blood, and it's been a pretty cool transition.
Yeah, I like to have friends with boats. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us, Dexter, and thanks for listening or watching, you guys, and cheers.